Okay, well, morning everyone. It is 9:30, so this Newham local plan examination hearing session is open. I'm William Fieldhouse, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the Newham plan. Can everyone hear me at the back? I don't know if the microphone's picking my voice up or not, but morning. But you can hear me. Okay. On my left is Lucy Hughes, who has been a planning inspector for a number of years, working on planning appeals and other casework, and is just about to start examining her first local plan. So as part of her preparation for that, she's spending today here with me in Newham. But just to make clear that I am the inspector solely responsible for this examination, and Lucy is simply here to observe, will not be involved in the decisions and recommendations that I make. Just a couple of housekeeping matters, please. A reminder if everyone could switch their mobile phones and laptops, etc., to silent. There are no fire alarm tests planned for today, I don't think. So if the alarm does go off, we will need to vacate the building in an orderly fashion following the green emergency exit sign. So out back through the door, into the lobby area, around to the left again, out of the building, and then congregate at the far end of the building behind me, opposite the DLR station. Charlotte, the programme officer, is around today, so if you need any help, just have a word with her in the first instance. The agendas for today and the rest of this week were published last week, and they were slightly revised. I can't remember exactly on what day, but today, hopefully, you've got the agenda, and we're dealing with revisiting some of the Matter 6 issues where I issued action points following week 2, and the council's responded to those. I'll say a few more words in a minute about documents that have been published, etc., since we were last here 2 weeks ago. And then we've got Matter 10, which we haven't looked at yet, which are various design policies. Well, I say we haven't looked at yet. We've looked at one design policy, D4, about tall buildings. And as you're aware, there's been a number of action points and council responses about that. So we'll be looking at that again. Then this afternoon, not before 2 o'clock, we will look at Matter 11, climate change, and then we are looking at Matter 7, gypsy and traveller accommodation again, because the representative he was due to attend when we considered it in week 3, was unable to attend, so we're going to go over that again. So we've got all day. This morning we're dealing with Matter 6 and Matter 10. We've got up to about 1 o'clock if we need it. I suspect we probably won't need that long. If we haven't finished, I'm not saying we should have finished, but if we haven't finished around 11 o'clock, we'll have a break then for about 20 minutes or so. Hope that's clear. Just a reminder that the purpose of the examination in this hearing session is to help me decide if the plan submitted on the 18th of July 2025 is legally compliant and sound, and if not, how it could be modified to ensure that it is. So I'll start each agenda item with a few questions to the council usually, and then open up the opportunity for others to make a contribution if they wish. If you do wish to speak, just put your nameplate vertically on end and I'll bring you in at an appropriate time. As you will be aware, we've got to microphones. If people speak up loud and clear, you probably don't need to use a microphone, but not everyone is as loud as everyone else. So I think try and use a microphone when you're speaking, not only for the benefit of people in this room, but also, morning.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay, don't worry. Are you participating this morning? Or? Yes, okay, well, you've got a seat, yeah. I'm just going through the usual introduction, so you've not missed anything you haven't heard before. Sorry. Yeah, so if you do wish to speak, put your name on end, and then I think probably use a microphone if you can. Yeah, that's right, because this is being broadcast on YouTube and the platform. I can't remember what it was. Zoom, yeah. And also, obviously, some people sitting towards the back of the room that may not be able to hear very clearly. Action points, as you'll be aware, I've published an action point note at the end of each week. They just set out some initial kind of findings or thoughts about what needs to be done, and the council's responded to those. So the week 3 action points were published on the 30th of January. That's document ED 20. The council's response to my week 3 action points was published on the 30th of January. That's last Friday, I think. That's document ED24. I'll say a few more words about other documents that are published, as I said, shortly. And I'll probably do an action point note after this week as well. The council's proposed main modifications or potential modifications, a number of points during the examination. So the most up-to-date schedule is ED20, but it's a revised version of ED20.
Yes.
And this was published on Friday, but I think it's been
updated and published yesterday.
Yesterday.
Am I formatting error?
Okay.
I think at the beginning all the figures went yellow.
Okay.
So we corrected that.
Right.
And republished it yesterday.
Okay. Okay. Fine. So the version that's on the website now, ED20,
yes,
is the most up-to-date and comprehensive, and that will include all of the potential modifications that were in your statements, obviously, but your action points for week 3 as well.
Week 3 as well, yes.
Yeah, including the tall building policy. Okay, fine. Right, I'm just going to go through a list of the various documents that have been published since week 3. So first of all, there's my action point note, IN10, and then the council responded to that. As I said, that's ED24. There's 2 statements of common ground that were published on last Friday as well, one relating to Beckton Riverside, it's ED22, and there's one relating to East Town Gasworks, ED23. There's an appendix to the council's response to my action points, which is some data from the viability assessment relating to the contributions to the employment and training tariff that policy J4 refers to. So that's there. That's something we're going to discuss on Thursday. So then there's also ED25, which was only published yesterday. Now, this is an update to the town centre network methodology paper, and that includes in it a number of mapping changes, I think, to some of the town centre, proposed town centres or proposed town centre extensions.
Would you like clarity on which ones?
No, I think the principle is that it does do that.
Yes.
So we've got on the agenda for tomorrow the town centres, things that we're going back to look at in response to the action points. So some of those mapping changes are things that have just come out of the blue. They are, some of them are clearly related to things we talked about, Silvertown and Beckton.
Yes.
Yeah, but there are some other more detailed mapping changes that I think, are there, or?
Not really. We also have looked at Sugar House Island, Sugar House Lane, local centre, following the discussions had, which made a small modification of that. And because we were looking at back to Riverside Town Centre and potentially actually putting a boundary on it.
Yeah.
And we have the resolution to grant for phase 1, which is delivering the neighbourhood parade. It makes sense to also look at the neighbourhood parade alongside to strategically cover.
Well, we'll pick up those. But insofar as they will lead to proposed modifications. So there's 2 things, isn't there? There's the policies map, there'll be changed lines on the policy map, but there's the maps in the site allocation maps, the modification. So we haven't got those drafted yet, but they would follow the lines that are shown in that ED25 document. Yeah, okay, right. That's reasonably clear. It was only something I saw yesterday afternoon, I think. So, but it's on the agenda for tomorrow, so we can deal with that. Okay. And then the other document that I'll mention, we mentioned the schedule of potential modifications. That's ED20, got that. There's also the note that was published yesterday, I think, my note, IN11, which was a supplementary question about viability again, asking the council to provide the extract from the viability appraisal assessment 4 scenarios and looking at the allocations and presenting it in a way that's hopefully narrowing things down. Okay, so now related to that is the council's outstanding response to action point 2, which was in following the first week of hearings. which was when we had the initial discussion about viability. And the viability assessment showed a lot of the allocations and typologies not being viable with all the policy requirements in the plan. And my action point was simply to ask the council on a hypothetical basis if something had to be modified in the plan to improve that viability assessment picture, turning more of the reds into greens, if not all of them green, what would the council propose? So the initial response was, I think that it would require a corporate meeting, and that would be in the new year. So on that basis, that action point response was going to be discussed this week under the housing development management policies, because the affordable housing policy is expected to be potentially one of the, well, I think the council said would be looking at the affordable housing requirements of the plan. So that was the basis of that. However, last week you notified the programme officer that the council still hasn't made a decision.
Yes, they requested a further meeting to discuss it with the wider cabinet, and basically, quote unquote, they need another week to decide.
Okay.
Hence the reason why I said weekend in. Is it weekend in the 13th?
I thought it was this week.
Sorry, weekend in the 6th. Yes.
So that's this Friday.
Yes.
So the cabinet are meeting this week.
Yes, on Wednesday.
And right, okay, and that's the decision-making body that will. Something should be available on Thursday.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
But anyway, on that basis, it not being available for today, and until hearing it could be available on Thursday, I was assuming it wouldn't be available until Friday, which was the scenario. So anyway, on that basis, I said, well, we'll not be able to deal with it this week, so we'll have to use one of the reserve days, which are programmed for the week commencing the 16th of February. So that's how it is at the moment, as far as I'm concerned. We had to, well, I in IN4, which was published back at the beginning of December with the programme, it said that if any additional hearing sessions would be needed, it would be week commencing the 16th of February. So that would be basically Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday if necessary. There may be some other matters in addition to that would benefit from a further discussion. So I haven't decided on an agenda for that week yet. But the one thing that is on it, the cabinet, is the response to AP2 and the affordable housing requirements in the plan. So I think we can probably safely say that will be on the Tuesday. Let's say that for definite. So if you're interested in affordable housing and viability and the council's response to AP2, let's say that's going to be on Tuesday, the 17th of February. If we need other things on that agenda, indeed, if we need Wednesday and or Thursday, we'll deal with that. It's when it comes to go through this week. Right, okay. I'll let, if anyone's got any queries about any of that, I'll let them raise them in a minute, but shall we just do introductions first? And then if anyone's got any procedural type queries, I will hear those before we move on to the first agenda item. So could I start with the council to introduce themselves, please?
Claire Lawrence, Principal Planner, London Borough Review.
Chances, Principal Planner, Newham.
Dan Yearman, Interim Planning Policy Manager at Newham.
Antonia Mariano, Principal Planner.
Matt Zephyr, Corporate Planning Consultants on behalf of IQ.
Oh, dear, sorry.
Matt Zephyr, Corporate Planning Consultants on behalf of IQ Alliance.
Julian Stevenson, Multi-Governance on behalf of Aberdeen.
Rebecca Adams, Planning Director, Quad, here on behalf of both members.
Julian Carter, Planning Director at Savills on behalf of Barking South East London.
I'm Lucy Rogers from Friends of Queen's Market.
And Matthew Rowe, Planning on behalf of United Students.
Okay, well, good morning. Well, I suspect that you can't hear people around the table sitting at the back there, can you? No. Well, two suggestions. One, do you want to move forward? And two, I think we will need to pass the microphone around if we can, please. So when you need to turn, there's a button on the top, you have to press and hold, it will go green. Does it need to be turned off? Got supply of batteries.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if we just, when it is your turn to speak, if you do want to move forward, or if you want to try and see if the microphone's working better.
That's all.
Okay, so any procedural queries or comments anybody wishes to make about the various things that I've said about the documents when we're dealing with things, etc., etc.? No, okay, thank you. Right, so affordable housing was on the agenda briefly, I think. It's not on the agenda now. Is there anything, you've explained the situation, what's happening with the council, that's fine. You've also seen my IN 11 note, which sets out some scenarios we can talk about on Thursday. I'm not suggesting in any way those are the scenarios that the council is or should be considering, because I've left it open for you, but I thought that it would be helpful for me to look at those on Thursday and at least get another picture of what the viability assessment says in terms of the different assumptions there. Okay, so let's move on then to matter 6 and the council's proposed, the council's responses to my action points. First of all, relating to purpose-built student accommodation. So there were 2 action points from this that followed on from last week, from week 3, sorry, AP 29 and AP 30. So the first one was about this categorisation of modifications, and I think I'll form a view about this in due course. But I think that the response from the council was that all of the modifications that have been drafted to policy H8 parts 2C and 2D would be, sorry, all of the modifications to that policy would be main modifications, apart from the change in terminology from saturation to concentration. Yeah. Okay. Well, if anyone's got a view about that, they can say so in due course. And then you've prepared a modification to the policy H8 to address the various things in my action point 30. So we've got that. That's in the schedule. Some of those you've categorised as main, some as minor, but the point is that they'll all be made to the plan when it's adopted. If I recommend the main ones and you decide to therefore make the minor ones are consequential to that.
Yes.
Okay. I think I'll say this now and you can come back to it later, but I think the easiest way to deal with this is going to be where there are, I know the policy, it's a big plan and the policies are long, but I think if there are modifications to a policy, the easiest way is to deal with it all as one modification. Set out the policy with all the changes, one modification, and that can then cover things that you may say, well, that could be minor, that could be major, main, or whatever. So I think when we end up putting it together as a scheduled consultation, then that's how I'll probably end up packaging it. So anyway, so anything you want to say about those modifications? No. Okay. Well, let's open it up to others. Policy H8 and the proposed modifications. Anything anybody wishes to say about those? Yeah.
Yes, I think.
Do you want to just put the microphone? So, thank you. You need to be quite close to you to pick it up, but it should. Is it green? Yeah, it's on. Just pull it a bit closer.
Okay, so
that's good. Okay.
Something which is accepted as the change in the implementation methodology to get a concentration points about using census data for students against conventional beds. If this is accepted, this was the previous methodology was used to justify its over concentration in Stratford in the first place. As there should be some sort of assessment against this new implementation criteria to see if there's actually an issue in the first place. Because currently the policy part 1 is based on an assumption as an over concentration based on methodology that's agreed to be flawed and changed. And therefore policy need to see if that part of the policy needs to exist. There's no over concentration, no policy or evidence base to support it.
Understood the point. Yeah. Okay. We'll let the council come back on. There was a discussion about which I didn't probably quite get to the bottom of. I can't remember if it was something that you raised or it may have been Unite. I think it was Unite. We were talking about the council presented the information about the amount of purpose-built student accommodation being built in recent years in Newham and how that related to the amount of development in London overall and the sort of percentage change, etc., etc. Well, I don't suppose on reflection, I didn't get out the end of all that a picture of what that means for the balance between students in Newham and purpose-built student accommodation in Newham, because it may have been starting from a low base, i.e. there wasn't enough purpose-built student accommodation in Newham. And the fact there's been a lot in recent years means that now there's more of a better balance, and it comes back to it's linked to the same point, I think. So, I mean, do you want to make a comment on that?
That's the point I was making previously, which is that
Yeah.
the methodology, particularly focused on Stratford, is based on 4 or 5 year periods where there's been more PBSA delivery in conventional housing. It ignores the 10 years previously where there's been thousands of conventional homes delivered in the area. So it's a snapshot in time that shows the market in particular instance, but also reflects the growth of student campuses in the area. But the appeal examples used by the council reference their topic paper are proposed on a census base. It's about mix and balance the community as a whole. It was done on students to residents, or done on a units to students. So what's proposed in terms of modification is consistent with that approach. What's not been done is to show what's the baseline now, and is there actually over concentration? What's monitoring is completely in line with the London plan in terms of mixed and balanced communities. There's nothing to say that there's oversaturation in the first place and need for further restrictions. Stratford?
Yeah, okay. I think there's 2 elements to the council come back. There's 2 elements, isn't there? It's about, I suppose, ensuring there's sufficient purpose-built student accommodation in Newham to meet local needs, but also ensuring there's this limited capacity that there is in Newham for development is used in a way that meets all housing needs in a balanced way. So, if you build more bed spaces for students, potentially there's less houses for other people. So that's the council's position, as I understand it.
But I think that sort of ignores the difference with Stratford, which is the most highly accessible part of Newham. It's with a London plan directed to the opportunity area.
Yeah.
It's where all high density developments directed. It's not really appropriate for family housing in the metropolitan centre. It's more focused towards student accommodation, just small housing units, high density accommodation. It's all where young people, where young professionals, first time buyers. It's not family location. It's further out. So
I think the council have a different view on that.
if you follow the policy directions as it currently says, you end up with a point where, for instance, you can have a brownfield site within 300 metres of a campus in the metropolitan centre, but Part 4C means you have a nominations agreement with that particular one.
Yeah.
Given there's multiple campuses in the area, you might have a nomination agreement one which is, say, 800 metres away, which is a reasonable walking distance for anyone, particularly students. But then it would fall foul of the policy. So if you look at how it's implemented, it doesn't really reflect how this can conceivably come forward to applications in practice.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Unanimous, is there anything you wish to say?
So similar points there. I think it's just getting very confusing about what is the actual strategy for delivery of PBSA in Newham? Is it directed to Stratford? Seems like it wants to be, but it's got to be 300 metres from the campus. We've to exchange emails with the council trying to see if there's a definition of what a campus is actually drawn anywhere on a plan. I can see that creating quite a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, there was the modification on the existing and approved campus, and there is a definition in words of what a campus is. Yeah. But you're saying that doesn't provide sufficient clarity, or?
Yeah, it's unclear what those campuses actually comprise. If we're going to go down this route, I think that should be set out clearly, demarcated.
But you wouldn't want that fixed in time, would you?
But at some point in time, you've got to know where the campuses are to work out. Not sort of clear for me as someone who's done a lot of work in student accommodation, what the campuses are. We try to look into it, and that's unclear in itself.
Right. Okay.
And but you go back to the point that I can see what you're saying about that you've got to provide enough housing for everybody. But as we said before, where there's been previous moratoriums around the country preventing new student accommodation, the students have just gone and lived in all the conventional housing. So is that achieving what the policy is setting out to achieve? So we question that.
What's in very simple terms, what would you say the balance is between the number of students studying in Newham, the main universities in Newham, and the amount of student accommodation there is purpose-built?
Well, there's about 33,000 students studying in Newham, and there's only 12,789 consented and operational beds of still student accommodation.
Okay, so
Some of those will live at home, but then again, go back to United themselves have got accommodation of the nominations agreements for King's University, so they travel from Stratford to other places as well.
well, I think
It was just just look at the numbers in Newham. There's a major shortfall.
there's a difference between the number of students and the number of bed spaces, but you wouldn't expect one for one, would you? I mean, I don't know what a typical proportion of purpose-built student accommodation would be to a number of students in a university town. I mean, they're quite a bit, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, some places it's almost getting towards one-to-one.
Is it? Yeah.
What people want to stay in purpose-built student accommodation throughout their university education.
Okay, no, thank you. That's helpful. I mean, do you recognise those figures in broad terms?
Yeah, I think we've sort of worked it out about 33,000 students studying at Newham-based universities at the moment.
Roughly 13,000 bed spaces.
I think we've got it in the topic paper.
Okay,
the
I can.
figure. Yeah, it's in the beginning.
Okay. Well, what about those points then about the nomination agreements, the geography of this campus?
I mean, I think it goes back to the broader kind of principles that have informed the policy. This is about not saying a blanket no to PBSA, but recognising that it's part of a broader set of housing needs that we have to meet across the plan period, and in areas which have experienced an overconcentration, still not limiting existing campuses providers' ability to provide additional accommodation to meet their growth needs. Hence why we've adopted a more stringent approach to nominations in those areas of overconcentration, because we want them to be linked to campuses. We don't want them to continue to be speculative, because you could effectively go on forever delivering kind of more speculative to PBSA that are eroding land that could meet other more needed housing requirements in Europe for family and affordable homes.
Well, they may not be speculative. They may have a nomination agreement with Central London University.
Yes, but I mean, I think our view is that we've really provided a really significant amount of PBSA bed spaces already. I mean, again, it's sort of the kind of details in the topic paper, but you look at a location like Stratford. Stratford's planning to deliver about a fifth of our general needs housing delivery over the course of the plan period. That's a really significant amount of housing delivery that's coming forward in Stratford. And if accommodation delivery keeps being as it is currently, PBSA is the more viable form of accommodation. PBSA gets delivered above general needs at the moment, is what we're seeing, and provisions come forward for PBSA more than they come forward for general needs. So I guess in setting an over-concentration benchmark, we've applied some flexibility through the action points, but effectively there has to be a point at which as a borough we're able to prioritise our priority needs we feel in these locations.
In terms of the definition of over-concentration, going back to the applicant's first point about how you worked it out, and then you've accepted the methodology.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, no, I think when we've worked it out currently, there's about, I think the percentage, if you were to apply that, if you were to apply the census calculation, it works out just under 25%, which is where we've worked out the overcalculation threshold. So yeah, but I mean, what I would say is that is a significant amount of bed spaces being delivered in Stratford currently. You're looking at about 7,000 bed spaces-ish in Stratford and Maryland neighbourhood at the moment. That's a significant portion of London's overall need for student bed spaces. So, we decided to set the concentration threshold at 25%. But I don't think that negates the fact that we're already providing a level of student accommodation, well above, what we consider, the sort of the number of students studying in Newham is about 7% of London's overall students. at the moment we're providing, accommodation well above that.
Well, yes, but the picture is 33,000 students and less than 13,000 bed space.
Yes, but not every student is going to require
No,
a purpose-built student accommodation bed space. They can be quite a premium product. So, not all students might necessarily be able to afford to live in a PBSA bed space. And also, what we say is that the need does fluctuate quite significantly for PBSA over time. I think that's, a point acknowledged by the GLA. And not all universities sort of attend the Mayor's Academic Forum. And there is a bit of a mixed picture from universities. Like some are requiring more PBSA to meet their needs. Others are actually saying, well, our PBSA has got some voids at the moment, and we're a bit concerned about that. So I'm not saying it's a blanket picture across all universities, but it is a bit of a mixed picture. I think it can change with time quite significantly.
When you referred to 7,000 Stratford being a high proportion of London's need, that's under Plan 2021.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is something that presumably is being looked at in the review of the London plan.
Yes, I mean, anecdotally, we've had a figure about what the expected need is going to be, but I don't want to sort of put that out, but it's not significantly higher than that 35,000.
So 35,000 was the figure in the
2021
10-year,
plan. Yeah.
35,000 over 10 years, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Unite.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's just a couple of points to come back on. We spoke last time about the London plan need looks at the growth in student numbers. It doesn't meet the current unmet need. And that's the key shortfall in that approach. In terms of nominations agreements, generally, we explained last time that a lot of universities have stopped entering into them because of the financial burden it places on them. So they'll take the affordable rent scheme, but they don't want the extra 15% or 16%, which we're going to look at trying to get nomination agreement on. And then looking at the universities in Newham itself, UCL, they definitely do take nominations agreements. I've seen them appear at a committee recently in Lambeth, where London-wide they've not got enough accommodation for just their first years. They've been outside. UEL, I don't think, do nominations agreements. And then we've got a layer on top of that, the fact that, as I've said a few times, United have got schemes, existing PBSA schemes in Newham, which are under nominations to universities outside of Newham. So, yeah, what's going to happen, if this has happened across the country, is that if you don't allow PBSA where there's a demand for it, the students will just live in the general need town.
Yeah, okay. I mean, well, you can have that argument with the GLA about how a London plan should calculate need, but I mean, that's not for me to determine. The London plan need is 35,000 over 10 years at the moment. It may go up, it may go down, I don't know. Plan, but whatever the methodology is, that's what we're going to say. Okay, IQL.
It's just.
Do you want to put the microphone back on close? Thanks.
Yes, it's just on the point about allocating within the boroughs. The London plan is explicit that the student need is not allocated within boroughs. No. For particular reasons that one of them being availability sites. So a lot of the universities in central London, there's very few available sites, certainly very few vital sites or restricted by conservation areas, and lots of other things that make those sites inappropriate. So part of the reason why Stratford is getting a lot of PBSA is because it's one of the largest regenerations, if not the largest regeneration area in London that's currently being built. So it has a lot of available sites compared to other places. But part of this also delivered brand new campuses where 10,000 new students and 2 campuses in the last 4 or 5 years, which is directly increasing that need. So it's quite disproportionate to say that Newham's meeting London would need in the short term 4 or 5 year period. Because 10 years before that, Camden would have been building out hundreds of student beds, which would be delivering London's need. So it is cyclical and it does respond to the campuses opening at the time. And the London plan is quite explicit. But the reason why there's no local need in the local plans is because it's for the universities to find where the land is and for it to be provided in these locations. And our second point is that PBSA is not all delivered in isolation. There's many mixed-use developments in residential areas across London where PBSA is part of a mixed housing mix, because it helps the viability of conventional housing. So this idea that by providing PBSA you are restricting housing does not really take into account the fact that it's areas that makes other types of conventional housing more deliverable, which is the key focus of the plan. So seeing this as a competing use is not really correct. It's actually many mixed-use developments where it's seen as a way of making aspects of rural housing delivery at the same time.
Okay, thank you, understood. Right, anything else on purpose-built student accommodation and the modification? You know.
I've got one point on the accessible rooms.
Oh yes, sorry.
I wanted to put in about, and the modification in itself is helpful, but obviously it's talking about and local evidence of need. We provided the London-wide and local evidence of need as part of the evidence into this EIP, and that shows there isn't the need for this many accessible rooms. My point is that this should be addressed through the local plan policy, because the evidence is before you.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Right, let's move on then to the next item on the agenda, which has a multiple occupation. There was a limited modification here, just being clarifying about the ancillary facilities. That's very straightforward. I think. As in, anyone got any comments about that? No. And then finally, on the accessible homes more generally, this is policy H3. This was a modification to the detail wording to better fit with the PPG of the legislation.
Yes, so yeah, there's the modification just to the implementation text around the points in the PPG about some sites not necessarily being suitable to deliver M42 and M43 homes. And yeah, just clarifying that the points that we sort of those key design considerations for these homes applies to the social rent and fully adapted homes that we deliver.
Right, okay. Okay, so you've double checked that that's now as it should be in line with the nomination. Okay, any other comments on that? No. Right. Let's move on then to matter 10 and the various design policies, starting with a familiar topic of policy D4. We discussed the fairly significant modification to it that came from an earlier action point from the week 1 discussions, I think, which basically, as you know, it did two things. One, it made the approach within tall building zones slightly more flexible. It also introduced a spatial strategy to clarify the approach across the borough to tall buildings, where they're located and why there's still a hierarchy of heights across in different parts of the borough. So that was the modification to part 2 of D4. And then there was the new part D4 part 5, which allows tall buildings outside tall building zones in certain locations with certain criteria. So we discussed that, and there were a number of detail points that arose, and you've look at the detail wording on that. So the modifications are there. I won't go through all of it, but people can comment on it as they wish. Just a couple of things. First of all, apologies. My action point 27 questions incorrectly referred, questions C to F referred to part 2. It should be part 5. Anyway, you picked up on that, so that's fine. Right. So the first one was the modification to part 2, which deletes the word only. So it's acknowledging that tall buildings in tall building zones, this is the approach, but it accepts that they may be outside the tall building zones. And then you amended the wording to the modified part 2C. This was to deal with the changing area at Beckton. And so you've explained that you're acknowledging there's an opportunity for transport improvements, but you can't change the heights at this stage, but it's setting the framework for that. So we'll come on to if anyone's got any comments about that shortly. And then in part 5A, the new part referred to high level of public transport accessibility. So that's clarified to be PTAL 4 to 6, which is the same approach.
In line with the
Other policies and the methodology, yeah. Okay. And then part A of part 5A, sorry. Let me just so this was intended to clarify the tall building zones, outside tall building zones, be located in an area with high PTAL, spot 6, within local or town centre, comma, or be located in an opportunity area.
Yeah.
I think it's still not quite clear because presumably elsewhere in the opportunity area, it needs to have PTAL 4 to 6, does it not?
This was to assume, this is again based
Going
on.
to put the microphone on.
Yeah,
Sorry.
So based on the methodology that we use to assess a suitable area for tall buildings, we, in principle, the areas that are low PTAL were excluded, but because most of them were in opportunity area, we consider as suitable for tall buildings. So with this point, basically, we are saying that although they might be with low level of accessibility, because they are in opportunity area, we can still assume they are suitable for tall buildings.
Okay, all right, okay, I misunderstood. So anywhere in an opportunity area,
Yeah.
which is shown on the key diagram, tall building,
Yeah.
subject to meeting the other criteria.
Yes.
Okay, no, thank you, that's understood. But in the town and local centres, they have to be the town and local centres with high PTAL.
Yeah.
Unless they're in an opportunity area, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because the London plan is directed growth in the opportunity area, so we need to acknowledge that.
Okay. Okay. So then we go on to the other criteria. That's fine. Then we get to part 5D and E. So that splits into two now. So this is either of these scenarios would apply. Yeah.
Yes.
So the first one would be about this eligibility of the tall building clusters identified in the tall building zones, transitioning from the height to the appropriate height range set out in table 1. So this is essentially the edge of tall building zones. Yeah, this is dealing with that scenario.
Yeah,
we talked about.
proximity to tall buildings.
Yeah. And we had some
Not
examples.
included in the boundary, but can still be considered suitable. That will apply. Will be used to transition from the cluster to the.
Is the microphone on?
Is it? Oh no.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the transition
Yes.
of the edge. And then part E is back to these local town centres.
Exactly.
These would have to have high PTAL. Yeah. And they would cross references back to policy D4 part 2E, and that lists town centres that have high PTAL.
Yeah. It's just to say that basically in terms of height, what we are expecting is a height that is similar to those town centers that we have already identified as suitable for buildings, therefore between 30 to 50 meters, but yeah.
Okay. And then you've got the other design type criteria that all have to be met.
And then,
Yeah, okay. Okay, so that's fine. So basically the bottom line of all that is outside tall building zones, you've got 3 basic locations. One, it's on the edge of the tall building zones, and it's that transition. Then there's the local town centres with good PTAL, high PTAL. And then you've got elsewhere in the opportunity areas.
Yeah, I think opportunity area and areas close to the existing, to the identified tall building zone overlap, because most of the tall buildings are in the opportunity area.
But there are some parts of opportunity areas. If you look at Maryland, the opportunity area goes quite a way to the east, northeast. I'm just looking at the key diagram and maybe. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I mean, that's the opportunity areas, but it seems to be some.
I think
Isn't it the key diagram? The Olympic Legacy Opportunity Area.
Yeah.
It goes as far as Forest Gate.
Yeah.
Centre.
Yeah, we have one areas there.
Yeah, there's quite a gap in between. But that's brought into potentially subjective criteria. Yeah. Whereas all the area to the central part of the borough and outgoing of east and north, that's outside the opportunity areas, and therefore the opportunities there would be
To be in a local
the local centres with the good retail. That's and it all back to the same methodology.
Yeah.
Okay, understood. Right. Okay. So that's my questions about that. So anything else you want to say? No, fine, thank you. Right, let's see if anyone else wants to talk about these modifications. Yeah, St. William. Do you want to get the microphone? Thanks.
Thank you. I don't have too much to say. Welcome the amendment to Part C with regards to TVZ5 Galleons Reach, which acknowledges the proposed improvement to public transport accessibility. I will just repeat an earlier point, and I think we probably agree to disagree on it. But our comments still stand about consented heights. Obviously, we've got a resolution to grant at Beckton Riverside for heights that don't align with what the local plan sets out. So I just reiterate that point.
Yeah.
But,
Okay, thank you. Right. Anything you want to say at this stage? No. Okay, thank you. Right. Yes, Friends of Queen Market.
Thank you.
Do you want to get the microphone? Could you pass the microphone down, please? Still on? No. Has it gone off?
Is that working?
Yeah, you might just need to put it a little bit closer. Thank you. Excellent.
Thanks. Well, given that we weren't here when I think these main D 4.2 kind of came in and was written, I wanted to just say something about that. So E is where Queen's Market falls, Green Street TVZ2.
Yeah.
And the idea of marking the location with a tall building is new in the policy. And we just think this is a very weak reason to have a tall building, just to mark a location. And there is no justification for it. There really is no justification. It's just been chosen, the site. And in a way, in paragraph 3.52, where it sort of summarises the tall building sites, that Green Street and others in it category don't really sort of fall into that category because they are kind of one-off. There's a choice that's been made for this one-off tall building in the middle of Green Street. The effect of the buildings, we know that the London plan says in D9 that high density doesn't have to imply high rise, and that they can have detrimental effects, these tall buildings. And the policy again carries on mentioning the characterisation study. But really, if you read the characterisation study and the one on tall buildings, the extra part of it, again, there's really no justification for it. In the characterisation study, the assessment of, if there is an assessment, as the council's described, does tend to focus on the typology of the area, which is just the physical look of it. Whereas in the London plan D1A, you're supposed to understand the existing character of individual areas, understand how, paragraph 3.1.3, it's understand how places are perceived, experienced and valued. And again, this hasn't really happened with the result that this tall building is going to be in a very incongruous place. One point I wanted to add is that Upton Park Station is locally listed, which I don't know whether that, in terms of looking at the area and its character, Upton Park Station is locally listed, which I didn't realise before, but I don't think that's mentioned anywhere. And also the council said they had been looking at the existing heights, you just said that again, the existing heights in the area. And I just wanted to point out that in the characterisation study, the height of Hamara Gar, which is the next, has been put into the wrong category on page 165, chapter 7. The study says it's 33 to 40 metres high, so it's got a dark blue star on it, but it's actually only 29 metres, so it's in the lower bracket. So it really it isn't that tall building right next to the market, as said. And yeah, I think that the fact that the area is low rise, which is obviously you note throughout that area, is there's plenty of potential for growth in the enhanced areas. In fact, the Mayor of London, in response to a government working paper on planning reform last July, said small sites are more incentivised to build out quickly, and a market with more SME developers will lead to faster delivery and increased supply. So in terms of housing, we respectfully say that given that there's no numbers attached to this site, the site is not critical to housing. Housing anyway could be there without a tall building zone on it. That housing could be provided with all the other planning rules that could support that. And paragraph 3.51 of 4D actually says tall buildings do not favour affordable housing, which is obviously what everybody would be looking for if we were to build housing. With all the extra floors of being created through this process, extra floors of housing, because of the flexibility and all the changes we've made, that there's a huge increase in the housing. Again, we're just saying this tall building is not suitable, and equally, the new policy D4.5, which has been added, is sufficient in a way for if somebody wants to build a tall building, that they can do it, because there's all that there. So the zone, which you've also referred to as the allocation as a corporate decision, I think that those are our reasons why we don't think it's justified. It's a one-off. It does not need to be there, and there's plenty of other alternatives to it. Thank you.
Understood, thank you. In terms of that last point, these small tall building zones that are on the more accessible town and local centres that are in terms of Green Street being one of them, there's West Ham and there's a couple of others, aren't there? I suppose the question, are those zones needed if those centres are? Because if I put in a limited line on that bit of the town centre, a local centre, is that justified? Is that particular specific location justified when you've got this more general policy now about allowing tall buildings in those centres? So, is my answer?
The boundary were based also on the analysis that we did and the fertilization study that plot in this market was identified as something to potentially to be repackaged in the future. So although at the moment it's not a site allocation, there is still interest from the council to deliver that in the future. This is not working. So yeah, it's right. So what I'm saying is that basically the area, when we analyze the character of the buildings, that area was of low quality, therefore something that could be changed and was considered something to be transformed, and therefore it went to the suitability for tall buildings. The point is that if we remove the tall building area, we still have the opportunity to build outside the building area and town centre, high level of accessibility. Well, the site will still fall in the category. And
yes, it would.
Yeah. And in terms of terms of height, the height that we agree on that site was related to the height on the existing building, but more based on the hierarchy of the town centre, because it's a very high town and it's a town centre, therefore it has 50.
In terms of moving off from Green Street, you pick the West Ham district, major centre. So that again has a tall building zone that's a small part of the town centre.
Yeah.
For the same reason, that's been picked out because of its location and the character of it, even though it's not an allocation.
Yeah.
And it's still needed.
Yeah, there is part
For
of
the same
it that still needs to be redeveloped. Some of it's been developed meanwhile, but yeah.
Is that any better? Thank you. Right. Okay. Understood. Okay. If you didn't have the tall building zone and you had this new policies parts 2 and 5, you have part 2E, which would list Green Street. You have this hierarchy, but if you didn't have the tall building zone, you wouldn't have the heights attack.
Sorry.
If you didn't have the tall building zone, you wouldn't have a height specified.
Yeah.
You could do that another way.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said.
Sorry. If you remove the tall building zone from the market and you left the Green Street local centre to be the broad area where you might get a tall building zone, the way you wouldn't have an appropriate building height set in your plan anywhere. I suppose that could be picked up in another way in this hierarchy. Yeah.
Well, then you could use a Maragall building, which is there, and the other building you pointed out
Yes.
on the stadium.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Precedent.
Understood the point. Okay. Anything else on the modifications to policy D4 tall buildings? I don't think there's anything else on my side. Okay. Thank you. Right. Let's move on then to the various policies in the plan relating to design. We start with BFN2, which is co-designed master planning. There are some modifications proposed both to the policy and the implementation text. Yep. Let's go back. So Okay, well, let's go through the various parts and the modifications, and we'll pick up points people have made. So the first one is part 1, which is about piecemeal development, seeking to prevent piecemeal development. There's a mod proposed just to clarify the wording, I think, here. And then a modification to the implementation text about phasing. So the first question is about piecemeal delivery, as it was, the piecemeal development will be resisted. I suppose you read that sentence in the context of what follows as well. But is that, it's not meant to imply that you can't develop in phases, in parts. It's what is it meant to achieve?
It's meant to achieve basically what the second part of that paragraph is saying, which defines what piecemeal development means. And that's because of the complex nature of the sites we are dealing with and the infrastructure requirements. And yes, definitely the phased delivery of these. So through requiring that development is not piecemeal, we are asking everyone to be involved early on and have a clear understanding of who, how, when things get delivered, so that the overall vision and the requirements for the site are delivered.
And then that's the process set out in part 2, the
Yes.
policy, etc., and implementation text, part 3 as well. So, yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, well, sorry. Any comments from this side on that particular clause? Yeah, sorry, Barclay Hayes. You go first, Barclay Hayes. Thank you. Okay, sounds like it's on. Yes, that's fine.
As mentioned at the beginning, I represent Barclays, South East London. They've been delivering a project called 12 Degrees Park in partnership with Great London GLAB, the Mayor's delivery vehicle. It's part of allocations N7SA2, which I'm sure you've come across before.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had a chance to pop up and visit West Ham, see the site, but what we're doing there is creating a new piece of city of approaching 5,000 homes. The first 1,000 of those have now been built around a major new park that's emerging, a new local centre at West Ham. So transformational development. It's a project I've been working on since 2015. So it's taken a decade to get this far.
Yeah.
As a development of scale, delivery now is critical to meeting Newham's needs, not anything else. I think we all recognise that developing at scale can be complicated. It can be difficult, hence the 10-year journey we've been on. We're all familiar with the emergency measures that have come out, and I think those speak to those give us a no doubt that development viability is increasingly marginal. And therefore, I think what we're looking for is a plan that has clarity in it, so that we don't find that there are trip hazards, if you like, that slow progress. And I've got 3 comments on this policy. I'm going to comment on matter for part 4 and part 5, which part 2 and part 4 will come back to. We just want to do part 1.
Well, no, I think deal with it. Deal with the 3 points.
In reverse order, because I think the part 2 and 4 are sort of the easier parts to deal with. In terms of the meanwhile use paragraph 4, I think Newham recognising their supporting justifications that meanwhile uses shouldn't come forward where they frustrate or prejudice your ability to deliver the scheme. I think we think that is a fairly fundamental point, and that wording ought to be in the wording of policy as well as the supporting justification. So hopefully that's a relatively simple clarification.
So that we're going to part 2.
That we're going to part 4.
Part 4.
So I think it, and I don't think we've submitted wording to you, sir, but if it's helpful, I've just scribbled here at the end of part 4 where it says, submit a meanwhile use strategy which will outline how vacant and unused plots will be activated. We could just add words where they do not fetter delivery or something like that. I think that would then mirror the supporting justification. And I think it's quite important that is seen on the face of the policy because it makes the plan easier to read.
Okay, yeah, interesting point. I mean, there is always this issue about how much implementation text is actually straying into policy. And that's an example of where you think that is a policy.
I think that's a because otherwise that can lead to misunderstanding
Yeah,
and
yeah.
confusion, and you end up with that text buried in the justification. And whilst I'm sure we all read justification around this table, not everyone does the design table.
Especially with such a big plan.
Indeed. I think on part 2, so this is co-design.
Yeah.
I'm having great fun at the minute finding my way around co-design policies all across London. They're obviously relatively new still. My sort of personal learning from that is that it's very much a sort of constructive process with your community. And that process effectively sets the priorities, it sets the brief. And it strikes me slightly unusual here that we have a policy that is sort of dictating what the community should be prioritising. Now, I get that there are priority issues that Newham want to ensure are covered, but it struck me that the policy could be much briefer if it actually just said that, well, either could consider all of these points, or whether even more simply it said must consider the design-led approach set out in the London plan. Because I think all of those points are in there, and I think if the community was considering that bigger basket of considerations that are set out in the design-led approach, then they could decide what was important to them in terms of setting that co-design brief for the site. So it just struck me there was more consistency with the intent of co-design policy. Because
A to F is a selective list of things that may well be important, but there could be other things.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, and you could say the same about part 3, but I focused on part 2.
Yeah.
So I think the design-led approach, from my recollection, I don't have it in front of me, effectively goes through a smorgasbord of everything that you would normally consider as part of a design approach. So given that policy already sits there at a regional level, we may as well refer to it.
I'm sure it is in the policy link.
Yeah.
But yes, right. And to part 1 then.
So those were the 2 hopefully sort of straightforward points. On part 1, and I'm sure others will echo some of these points around the table, our concern relates to this term piecemeal, which the council has just talked about, which I think we're concerned is a little bit ambiguous. And I think what we've got here is, by definition, we've got these large strategic allocations which cut across ownership boundaries. 12 trees, for example, is part of this broader allocation that also includes Bromley by Bow. It's a St William project. I know they're both part of the outfit, but they're effectively for their own entities. And again, I think we completely acknowledge the need for good planning. And I think that's actually what everyone around this table does day to day. But in practice, land in different ownerships comes forward at different times because there are different commercial considerations, there might be different constraints, etc., etc. And therefore, we need to recognise that sites like this can't necessarily, or allocations, sorry, can't be brought forward in one hit. And I think the classic example here is, if we hadn't got on with the 12 trees park part of this allocation between 2015 and today, we wouldn't have 1,000 homes there now. If we had been waiting for Bromley by Bow to catch up with us, which had its own considerations to deal with in terms of the listed gas holders, etc., etc. And I think our fear is that piecemeal is misinterpreted as part of the allocation. So again, I think we would suggest that the paragraph starting piecemeal delivery is deleted. If that was unhelpful, I think we would prefer it to be a positive statement that again says something along the lines of will support phased development across the allocated sites, where it can be demonstrated again positively that this approach is consistent with the design approach set out in the London plan. I think with that clarity, sir, we'll have a positive policy framework rather than a negative one. We'll be giving clarity that large pieces of sites can come forward at the appropriate time. And I think all of that should ensure that we get delivery sooner rather than later.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Yeah, St William, do you want to pass the mic down?
Right.
I think you had similar concerns. Yes.
Thank you. I mean, very much echo one of the points just made. I think just sort of the starting position is the overarching principles of BFM2 are very much supported. An approach to comprehensive design and development we think is aligned with a lot of national and London plan policies which seek to promote effective use of brownfield land and optimising it. So it's the right approach. our concern is around the word piecemeal, and how that is, well, it's not defined, and how that could be interpreted. And we've already seen this draft policy prevent development from coming forward, and that is the risk that we feel as drafted. It could, that's the implication of the current drafting. The implementation text does talk about master planning, and we have some very live experience dealing with a framework master plan at Beckton Riverside. We've also been working jointly with GFL, Newham and Aberdeen on our statement of common ground, and made some really positive progress around the wording on that site application, which talks to this point about bringing forward comprehensively designed development. So what we're looking for is that positive work that we've done and that wording to make its way into policy BFN2, which, as you just heard, we would also like it to be drafted in a positive manner. So remove reference to resisting piecemeal development, which I think could be misinterpreted, and supporting multi-phased development. And we have some wording as well, which we could suggest as an alternative. But we think, as drafted, policy BFN2 is not clear, not particularly helpful, and not in line with paragraph 36 of the framework.
Okay, understood. Aberdeen?
Morning, everybody. I think what we obviously very much agree with what some of them are actually sort of saying. Government really.
Couldn't put the mic up.
Just. Right, you go, sir?
Yeah, that's great.
Right. Firstly, we've made progress over the last couple of weeks, particularly in terms of the site allocation. It seems to us that there's probably a takeaway to actually go and see if we can align some of that agreed wording into this policy. And I think it's possible to do that with Newham's cooperation, which has been very good so far. So we would like to do that. I think there is a fundamental sort of point about piecemeal. I don't think it can be dealt with without actually sort of taking it out. So we very much view that sentence has to be taken out. There has to be sort of agreed wording about phasing. Phasing, I think we've discussed in quite a lot of detail over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I think there is a solution on that. But the fundamental, I think, red light, green light point is the phasing has to take out. The piecemeal has to be taken out. I think the other point, which is probably slightly peculiar to Aberdeen, is we've got the benefit of having tested out the impact of this type of wording, not exactly the same wording, but this type of wording through that last appeal. And I think there's very clear guidance from the inspector how that was dealt with. I suppose it also is an example of how inadvertently it might manifest itself if it's actually dealt with in a way which is really unhelpful to the phased delivery of this area. So we want to avoid that confusion in the future. We don't want to spend any more money on appeals. We don't think there's any need to, and don't think you want to either. So I think that can be dealt with. But the point which follows on from that, which also deals with this piecemeal point, is we have agreed with the new triggers in place that there will be phased development. And I think if we get that wording on phased development to allow us to actively asset manage going through the shopping mart, which obviously is a major part of the allocation, then that allows us to also tackle this point. So I think that's the broad summary of where we're at. But the 2 points are, let's think about what the appeal taught us, but also let's make sure we actually allow phased development, hopefully with agreed wording, up to allow us this active asset management, which allows us to support the next stages of delivery of Beckton Riverside Town Centre.
Okay, thank you, understood. So yes, I understand all those points, and they're obviously, coming up from the same sort of perspective on it. And we will have a discussion about the statement of common ground and the modification to Beckton Riverside. So it will be helpful to think about this policy in that context as well. So thank you for pointing that out. That's helpful. I mean, I suppose the umbrella thing, I suppose, that I've not really thought about how it's phrased, but about the master planning process and how that somehow sets the framework for what then follows through the phased development and or it's not just phasing over time, is it? It's coordination between different areas and different ownerships and things. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Samuel's done to just comment on that. Sorry.
No.
Working.
Yes, Chris.
It was just a very quick point, which you might find helpful. For my sins, I've spent a lot of my career doing an awful lot of work across the Isle of Dogs, which I'm sure you'll know well. And again, we've had there a series of sort of, I guess you'd call them strategic allocations, which sit across multiple land ownerships, because that's just the nature of that place. No one expects all of those sites to come forward together. Again, so I'd invite you to go potentially down and have a look at an area called Marshall, which is just to the south of Canary, where there are any number of tall buildings, which we've done for Berkeley. What we had to do with each of those individual parcels coming forward within those wider allocations is demonstrate a good planning approach that showed that we didn't prejudice what was going to happen elsewhere. Yeah. So there was no need to do a comprehensive master plan for an entire allocation. We just employed our good planning skills, and Hammond's employed their good planning skills to think about how edges might work, those sorts of things. So again, I think it's just being proportionate in terms of how we do that. And again, I'd echo Julian's comments from Aberdeen in terms of recognising that phased development is what happens, and that's what the policy should be positively promoting.
So the simple idea of a comprehensive master plan is too blunt, it's too simple. It won't always be the most appropriate tool.
I mean, I think there is no way that in 2015 Berkeley SEL could have developed a comprehensive plan for the whole of NA, whatever it was. I don't know actually if we even had control over the full site at that stage. But what we have done hasn't in any way prejudiced the process that Bromley by Bow have then gone through 5 years afterwards. So that's proof that you don't need to look at it holistically, as long as you're aware of your context, which is what that's all about.
So for our two sites, we have an obligation. Bromley by Bow Gasworks site has an obligation in its section 106, which has a specific clause about addressing the boundary between the two sites. So master plan didn't exist, but we do have an obligation to work together where the two sites come together.
Yeah, and this policy, VFN 2, part 1, you've got the first bit with the objectionable reference to piecemeal development. It goes on to talk about realising the neighbourhood and/or site vision and/or the design principles, and where the timing of delivery would be unsupported by infrastructure. So that could be turned more around more positively. But so that's the point. You've got the vision for the neighbourhood, you've got the site allocation, design principles, etc., and you've got the need to have supporting infrastructure. So that's what you're aiming to achieve. That's the key thing.
I'd be very happy to submit some words to you, but if you move, I've just written down for 2 seconds. I mean, the way I removed the sentence starting piecemeal through to infrastructure, I replaced it with multi-phase development will be supported, and where brought forward as part of the site ahead of a proper allocation, development should have regard to the design-led approach, the delivery of the ambition of the wider allocation in order to demonstrate any wider neighbourhood vision, neighbourhood policy and design requirements are met, and will not prejudice promoting wider development towards that effect. So I think that would then be a positive policy that I think would be very helpful.
Okay, right. So I think I've got the points. Aberdeen, do you want to just?
Yeah, so I think what we want to emphasise is that first sentence. We definitely do agree with. Sites should be designed, developed comprehensively. We're not trying to sort of move away from that. That has been, I think where it gets rather tricky is actually the following bit. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary. There's a lot of further detail in those subsequent parts. So if we can make our way, see if we can make sure we do a bit of knitting policy. Okay. We might be able to come to a conclusion that would be also satisfactory to me.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I think I fully understand the points. I think we've taken that as far as we can, short of trying to write a policy by committee in a room. So let's. Thank you. Oh, sorry, William. Yeah.
Do you want? I've got 2 other comments on this policy.
Yeah, deal those, and then we'll come back to the council.
Similar comments on the meanwhile use strategy.
Yeah.
I think as drafted at the moment, it requires the submission of a meanwhile use strategy, and we made comments at previous hearings about the number of document requests.
Yes, understood.
So I suppose our plea is for some revisions to the wording which seeks to maximise or encourage meanwhile uses where feasible. For gasworks sites in particular, the delivery of meanwhile uses is very much dependent on actually being able to remediate the site. So you might have an empty site and think, great, it's perfect for meanwhile uses, but it needs to be safe. So we'd ideally like to see a little bit of flexibility featured in that policy, and for the emphasis to be on delivery of meanwhile temporary uses rather than a request for a strategy. And in the same vein, my second point relates to the requirement for post-occupancy surveys. Again, the necessity for it in
Yeah, okay. Aberdeen, then I'll come back.
Good one. So I think this, we very much support the idea of, we very much support the idea of actually having meanwhile uses. We think that's something which we would like to look at and take forward. I think what we want to do is do a takeaway and actually make sure there is clear definition and clear differentiation between meanwhile uses and asset management, which is part of an ongoing process, so we don't get tripped out there in the future. The final point, which St William raised in terms of the monitoring, we set that out in our representation, so I don't think we need to say anything more about that.
Yeah, understand. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Friends of Queen's Market.
Just speaking for people who've had sort of had co-design.
Sorry. Thank you.
Rare things. Speaking to for people who've had co-design done to us, so to speak. I don't really see that in the implementation seems quite vague. There's a lot of text. There doesn't seem. Is there any sense of what responsibilities the council has as regard versus the developer? Because it's sort of saying off you go and consult with all these people. Equally, it's mentioned that the statement of community involvement is involved, which is, as I understand it, the council's guarantee to the public what they are going to do. So how is that linked with what the developer's got to do, and could it be a bit less vague in there? Because otherwise it could just be words which aren't very easy to actually apply.
Okay. Understood. Right, council response to those various.
Yes. Would you like me to take them in order 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we can take away and look at part 1 to turn it into a positive statement. I think the way it's drafted mirrors our desire to continue an approach that was implemented with the existing local plan, which was not there before, but very much needed, knowing how complex our sites are.
Yeah.
And part 1 and part 2 of the policy are in a way a reflection of this continuation, but we can look at it in terms of turning it into a more positive statement. It is about coordination, like you've rightly read, and I will provide an example of Riverside, actually, since they're in the room. We still, that site allocation would need to deliver education, the town centre, various other bits of infrastructure, including green space overall. There are flexibilities through the policy about where and how, but we need the overall vision to be delivered, and that flexibility then needs to be coordinated by the landowners so that everything that's needed for a successful neighborhood does get delivered, and there will be negotiations that landowners themselves will need to have as part of that, and this neighborhood, this master planning principle is in place precisely to ensure that that happens. That also ties in with part 2 and the detailed criteria that sits under it, which are about the points that the council themselves need as part of the master planning process to make sure that the master plan ties in with these specific elements, what is actually needed. So in a way, part 2 is a more detailed explanation of what does piecemeal or not doing piecemeal development mean. So they're linked together in that sense. In terms of co-design and responsibilities, council versus a developer, our plan is to look at this as part of a review of the statement of community involvement and better define what the co-design principles mean and the kinds of processes and provide guidance as part of this process, basically.
So that would provide more clarity.
Yes.
Friends of Green Market could look at what the statement of community involvement and say, well, that's what we're entitled to, and then the developers would know what they're expected to do.
Exactly, yes. And I would also perhaps point out the direction of travel nationally with the draft MPPF. Obviously, it's not as yet something we can look to, nor something we're being examined against. But principles that sit in this policy are actually quite clearly now brought from guidance into actual MPPF policy around master planning and also around occupancy evaluation and the role of that. So that's kind of skipping up to number 5, but I wanted to provide that kind of context that we're all pulling in the same direction of policy supporting best practice. So part 4, meanwhile uses versus meanwhile use strategy. Here, because it sits under the policy related to master planning, the idea is that as we're thinking about the master plan and landowners come forward with the site, they will also about phasing. So as part of that, it will be clearer which parts of their sites might be vacant for a longer period of time and therefore might possibly have another way of activating them in the interim, which could be helpful even for the overall strategy of the master plan, testing out ideas and the market, perhaps even in some ways, and figuring out what things might work and what things might perhaps be adjusted just on a little mini test period of time. And that's what this is trying to do. It's trying to provide and incentivize that the site is thought of holistically, and where possible, a meanwhile use strategy would be implemented to bring forward. And it could be a use, it could be a building, it could just as well be public realm, like it's very supported under the London plan. It could look at routes through the site and how those could be activated early on. There's loads of things that could be put in here that are not necessarily impeding further development that could actually help, basically. What I think perhaps we could take away and look at is this idea that it's not always safe to allow a meanwhile use on a site, and there could be places where this is not reasonable. So we could have a look at how the policy or the implementation text is drafted so that it's flexible in those circumstances where it would not be a reasonable approach to allow early access to a part of the site.
Okay, anything else on BFN? Yep, Barclay and then Friends of Queen Margaret.
Is it all right?
Yes, no, that's okay.
Thank you. Firstly, welcome the council's suggestion that we work on a positive wording for part 1. And again, I don't know how Sarah you want us to do that, but if you want us to work together, I'm sure we'll direct us. In terms of the point that was made around infrastructure, again, we completely get that some of these big sites have things like secondary schools or whatever to provide. And again, that's exactly what we did at 12 Trees. And the policy or site allocation there clearly direct the secondary school to our part of the site. So there was clarity for the owners as to who needed to provide which bit. My instinct is that where you've potentially got a more complicated site with a lot of smaller pieces, if you were to put the burden of a secondary school onto one particular tile, you would end up with an undeliverable scheme. So I think there's a different issue at play there. And certainly where you've got large sites with large ownerships, I think you can direct the appropriate infrastructure to the appropriate parts of the site. And on the meanwhile point again, completely support meanwhile uses. I think the observation though is that we don't always know whether vacant plots are going to be at the delivery stage when we submit the application. So that's our concern, is make sure that when we're submitting that strategy or submitting whatever it's going to be at the planning stage, that there's enough flexibility in it to be able to do things differently 5 years down the line when our construction guys get hold of everything and say, well, hang on, we need a materials holding site there, we need a wheel washing station there, or whatever it might be. So it's just that flexibility.
So thank you. Friends of Green Market.
Well, just to say, it's a very good policy to have. It's really, the intention is really good.
Yeah.
And just that the co-design, that the input of people always makes things better if it's correctly done. So if that can work, it's just a way of making it work for everyone, and then that can produce good results.
When the council updates its statement to community involved, you consult on that?
Yes.
Yeah, so you'd have the opportunity to, you'd smile in a cynical sort of way.
I think the only one of two people in a room tried to talk about one of those once, and I don't think they're consulted enough. Once they've been written, they're not a document that's used. I think they should be used more in the general scheme of things.
Okay. Well, I suppose what more can I do? This policy says that's what the council will do, and it seems to me it's a good commitment and it is a useful tool.
Yeah, it could be good. Works.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a lot of things. Okay, thank you. Right, anything else on BFN 2? I think what we'll do then is have a break now, and then we'll move on to D1 and the other courses, some of which I've got quite a bit to talk about, some of them not very much at all, so we'll pick up there. So it is 11 o'clock now, so we'll come back at 20 past. Okay, it's 11:20, so let's resume on the next policy, which is policy D1, design standards. Some modifications proposed, both to the policy and the implementation text. People will have a chance to see those. I think I haven't particularly got any questions. So I think I'll just, is there anything the council wish to say about policy as it was on the reason for the modifications? I'll just open it up for others to see if they want to elaborate on the points they made in their statements.
Modifications largely reflect ones we had put in before as part of the submission.
Yes.
So the reasons for that come from Regulation 19 consultation response.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, does any comments? So, William, do you want to run through any of your? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. The relatively minor comments.
Yeah.
On this one, but I will just.
And you've seen the modifications, presumably.
Skip through them. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
I think the first point to make around council design guidance is more of an observation around national policy and London plan policy, which does acknowledge that this design guidance could come forward as part of the application process in the form of design codes developed by landowners and developers. So I think as worded at the moment, there's a natural emphasis on council-led or adopted design guidance, and a query whether it could perhaps be slightly more robust, even if it was in the implementation text, that there was some acknowledgement to the role of application design codes, which are very common, particularly with outline schemes affecting Riverside, from by Bow, got design codes for them. So a small point.
Doesn't the modification to part 1 address that by?
It's supported by the council,
Yeah.
which, it's a minor point. I think the mods do definitely help.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Then two further points in relation to the secure by design requirements in part 3.
Yeah.
It has a specific requirement to achieve silver award, which was removed from the implementation text, so which we support. I think we feel it's too prescriptive to define the level, and if it's come out of the implementation text, it should be removed from the policy wording itself. And then the last point was related to the temporary buildings requirements, which is under part 4. Just that the policy requirements for temporary buildings feels onerous. It seeks to set quite high standards of design for temporary buildings, which principles are understood, but by virtue of them being temporary buildings, I think that policy requirements could, in effect, prevent temporary buildings from coming forward, which jars a little bit with what we talked about earlier in terms of promoting meanwhile uses. I guess the point is just trying to ensure that the requirements are not so onerous that it works against the objective of encouraging meanwhile uses for temporary buildings.
So the part 4 of the policy basically says temporary buildings like 3 use for the year or more should apply the same design quality standards, but which is for all permanent development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which just feels
Yeah.
particularly onerous
Okay. Yeah, understood. Yeah.
from a sort of financial perspective.
Okay, thank you. And the design panel comment?
Yeah, again, it's a relatively minor point. We support independent design review. I think it's just making sure the policy has sufficient wording in it. To our understanding is that there isn't a review panel currently in place, so there's no sort of framework to work within. reading his hands. But I think the policy wording's fine. It says major developments fitting the terms of reference of the Newham Design Review Panel should be assessed by the panel and any community and or youth design review panel appointed by the local panel, which is, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, thanks. So I think the main issue there is this temporary buildings. I think on the silver one, the mod does propose to delete the reference to silver policy, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, as well as the implementation
Sorry,
text.
yeah.
So in terms of the temporary building, this requirement for any building that's for a year or so, a year or more, sorry, to achieve the same design standards as permanent. Is that necessary? Or is it not onerous? Or
I'm pausing because
Yes.
having read the 1.4, it makes no reference to part 1 or the rest of the policy, which would be more onerous. The focus of part 4 is really focused down from our own experience as a council of managing temporary applications. What are the key considerations for the ones that tend to last longer? And that's what the policy is trying to do together with the implementation text. So if it's about accessibility, it's about public promoting active travel, it's about high quality landscape, and it's about amenity impact. So this sets a much more reduced standard than D1.1 itself, which includes a lot more consideration of detail, materials, etc. So I don't quite understand.
part 4 of the policy,
Yes.
it says, maybe I'm misunderstanding what it's referring to. Temporary buildings are likely to be used for a year or more should apply the same design quality standards set out above. So what's set out above mean? All of the rest of parts 1 to 3 of the policy. What you were saying,
I'm not seeing this set out above that you are seeing. I'm looking at part 1.
No.
I'm looking at policy D1, part 4.
Yes, D1 part 4, temporary buildings that are likely to be used for 3 years or more, including years already in use, should be designed to a high standard with particular attention to accessibility, etc., etc. Should be designed for disassembly and reuse. Extension of a tenant will only be permissible in certain circumstances and where the quality of design, you mean the last part? Is that what you're talking about?
Are you looking at the policy or the implementation text?
No, the policy itself.
Okay. Well, I read the first sentence. To me, temporary buildings are likely to be used for a year or more, including years already in use, should apply the same design quality standards set out above.
That's not.
Is that what you read?
No.
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 But I'm not looking at the amended version.
So I'm looking at part 1. Right. So we're looking
I'm
at.
going to my online version.
Yes. That's the one I usually access anyway. The one
You gave me this book to read. Right, let me read the policy part.
Apologies.
So maybe similarly, which temporary buildings that are likely to be 3 years or more should be designed to a high standard with particular attention. Okay, yes, right. Sorry about this. Okay, but you still think that's too onerous?
It just feels quite
Okay.
detailed for temporary buildings.
Right.
It feels I understand your objective, but it feels disproportionate for a temporary building.
Right, that's interesting, isn't it? This has got a different version than that. You're looking terrified.
I'm wondering what version you've got on that.
Why?
Yeah, odd.
I might give you the wrong one this morning.
What?
What have you got? What does that look like?
Oh, Reg 18, yeah, you did. Yeah.
Sorry,
That
I
explains it. That explains it. Right, okay. Okay, right. I won't look at that anymore. I'll look at this. Okay. Right, okay. So, okay, right. Leave it with me. I want to think about it. Anything else on policy D1? Okay, right. Sorry for that little
I'm
distraction.
clarified in the end.
Right. Should always read the cover of the book. So anything else on policy D fund? Right, D2, public realm net gain. So there's some comments from Berkeley and St William about this, but I think I'll let them pick up on these. London plan. London plan context for this. D8, yeah, okay. Right, anything you want to say before I to pick up any detail points from St William and Berkeley? But some mods proposed to the implementation text. Again, that's following Reg 19, is it? Oh no, there's not mods. No, there isn't mods. Sorry. No, sorry. No, there's nothing on detail. Okay, thank you. Well, let me hand over to St William.
Yes, I've put everything already, I think, in the matter statement.
Yeah, okay.
If there's anything to add.
Right, go on. Let's just. You want to elaborate on the? Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
3 quite brief points relating to the location and the funding of play space, and then the need for these management plans and submission.
Yeah.
In terms of the location and seeks to direct play to being within the public realm, we don't think that's always the right answer. And to give an example, 12 Trees Park has some quite extensive podium spaces, and for good design reasons, we'd agree with Newham that things like doorstep play should be provided within those podium areas rather than the public realm. So again, so I think we just feel the plan is overly prescriptive where perhaps it doesn't need to be. Second point on funding, there appears to be a requirement for development to fund off-site play, and whilst the ambition is laudable, we are concerned that there are 2 issues there. Firstly, the plan is prioritising that over other things that may be asks of the development, and ultimately that should be a development management prioritisation. So if you're dealing with affordable housing, perhaps that's more important the thing off-site play in place. And then secondly, the principle of whether the plan should be requiring off-site improvements that aren't necessary for the purposes of good planning to make our site come forward. Obviously, there's the Section 106 sort of test context for that. And then the third point, in terms of these management plans, again, it's just having flexibility within to recognise that as we draft these plans at submission or determination phase, when we get into delivery, they might need to change because, again, the same example as before, when we suddenly realise we need to build a park, whatever it might be, we may have to vary that. I think we've just did a couple of very small wording changes, indicative of things like that. That was all my comment there.
Thank you. Yes.
2 main points on this policy. First is with regards to part 3 of the policy D2, which is the requirement of an alternate contribution towards public realm enhancement and maintenance beyond the site in line with the ATZ. There's no definition of proportionate, so one might argue that it's slightly unclear, but also we don't think the requirement meets the tests of national plan policy framework in terms of being necessary. We've also talked at previous hearing sessions about the cumulative impact of policy requirements, and I think this is another example. We've got a whole plan viability assessment that already shows that the policy asks that the local planning around are not viable, so this is another layering on top of that, which also policy BFN4, which is the priorities for the council, seeking to prioritise affordable family housing, local access to employment and training, and delivery of required infrastructure. This looks like it comes quite far down the agenda, and just simply doesn't meet the task. The second point was around the public realm management plan, and this is the same point I've made before about the number of application documents being required by the local plan. there's about 60 in this local plan, and it just results in the process becoming quite unmanageable and costly, and ultimately delays delivery. And emerging NPPF policy PM 6 talks about making sure that plan makers in preparing plans only address matters and include policies that are necessary and relevant to the plan being prepared, and avoid unnecessary duplication of parts of the development plan and so on. Feels like this doesn't fully align with that direction.
Sorry, Unite.
So I recognise I was.
Oh, sorry.
I was unhelpful. I didn't give you any references for my 3 points. The point around public realm, play not necessarily being the public realm is 2D policy. The off-site point we've just heard about was part 3, and public realm management point 5. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, Unite.
Yeah, so I've got exactly the same points. I won't spend long on them. Part 3, that seems that all what the council are asking for there is picked up by Bill. Double counting, obviously PBSA already provides a massive contribution towards SIL, and therefore I think that element of the policy should be struck out. And again, very much share the same concerns on point 5 about the number of documents you need to submit to get a valid planning application. We think this is something that should definitely come further down the line. Any form of public plan management plan, it's too early in the process to get that agreed up front. So I think that should be struck out as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, we had a brief discussion about the tariff for employment and training, which we're going to talk about again on Thursday. I suppose it's a similar principle here. This is the role of the plan in saying that so first of all, actually, what is major developments referable to the mayor? What's that threshold for housing, say?
150 units. That's what
So it's quite a bit.
150. It is quite big.
Yeah, so it's not major development.
No, it's not.
It's
It's
major.
higher, yes. Higher threshold, which also implies that there will be a different impact from that development. Sorry, was it time for me to come in?
Yes, sorry, I was asking. So the first question was, what's the threshold? Yes, to. And then secondly, it's about this principle of the plan in effect setting a SIL type tariff to be used for certain things.
And come back to the place-based one.
Yeah, come back. I'll just deal with this one first. Yeah, sure.
Okay. So what this policy does is 2 things. One ties in with the transport statement requirement, which in terms of applications referable to the mayor, the GLA and the TFL ask for that active travel zone assessment.
What does that then say? What's that then?
So if it's helpful, I can provide you with the explanation from TFL. Basically, that asks the developer to look at the site in the context of the wider neighborhood, identify key travel destinations that would be reasonable to conclude people from the development would go to, such as town centre, GP surgeries, places, etc. Actively assess the quality of those routes along those key destinations, and in line with the Healthy Streets indicators, propose amendments in how can the scheme itself contribute to improving those routes so that the quality is improved. But obviously this always sits outside of the red line boundary. However, it's a process that's already being applied, and the only thing that's coming out of the policy is the fact that we're making it clear that this is an approach you will need to consider in Newham. In terms of what it identifies, that will depend on a case-by-case basis, depending on what this assessment finds. In some cases, it could be quite minimal, like a bus shelter, or it could be pavement improvements or planters. There's a lot of softer measures when you think about the overall cost of things. But
so I understand. So 2 things there, I suppose. When it refers to an active travel zone assessment, that's something that TFL have guidance for, or whatever.
Yes.
It's part of the transport assessment that you do.
Yeah.
So so it could be expressed in terms of the transport assessment, but it's being specific to that. Yeah. And secondly, the policy, you're saying it's directly related to the development and it's necessary because you'll have identified where these 300 people living in these new homes will be likely to be walking to and going to, or going on buses to. Yeah.
Yes,
So it's
exactly.
making that improvement. So if unless those routes are perfect now or don't need any improvement, well, I suppose that's the point. And what's the threshold for why they necessarily need improvement? But, so that's the principle.
Threshold is the process itself in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
But the way this is written, it's presuming that I know it says proportionate, but yeah, okay, understood. Okay, right. I'll think about that one.
Okay. In terms of the calculation itself, that's what highways themselves are currently using. Section 278 negotiation
Yeah.
contributions when there is a requirement. And
So sorry. Go on. So TfL will have a formula.
TfL have a process by which they would identify what would be required as an improvement.
Oh yeah, and then you work out what it
Then
costs.
we work out what the cost of these improvements are, and the methodology is about the maintenance of this for the lifetime of the development, so that once they're there, they maintain the quality of the public realm for the lifetime of the development.
So I do a transport assessment. It involves this ATZ assessment thing. So it does that. It works out that these residents are going to walk to this school and they need a new pedestrian crossing, for example. And that's the main thing. So that's necessary.
There's an overlap here between the need for an active travel zone assessment, identifying things that are tied in with the behavioral change and transport policies, which would be crossing, versus public realm improvements, which are things like pavement and bringing in greenery and the kind of more placemaking based elements of it.
Okay. Right. Okay. Understood. Do you want to just comment on that before we go back to the other parts that you mentioned?
It was just a very simple approach. It goes back to my earlier theme. Obviously, London Plan has the design-led approach embedded within it, which tells us to look at context, etc., etc. So we don't disagree. That's exactly the right thing to do. Invariably, when you get to a Section 106 negotiation, the NHS will ask for money, TfL will ask for money, affordable housing will get to money, etc., etc. Often not all those demands can be met, and it seems wrong that this is pre-allocating, if you like, priority to those transport improvements if that isn't the priority when we get to the development management stage.
Or would it just be put into the prioritisation with everything else?
If it comes down to viability, it would. If it does have an impact on viability, it would definitely be considered under the 10-4 criteria.
Explicit in this policy, I imagine that someone will hit me over the head with a rolling pin quite a lot until we do pay it because it did him. But so it seems to me to put an additional level of priority. And again, as a member of the public reading this plan, I think I'd be entitled to expect it to not think it was then going to be lost in a opaque Section 106 negotiation.
Okay. Right. So anything on the other parts? Sorry, I jumped to the end.
Yes.
To you want to respond to the ones about the play area and.
Yes, with the play area, the policy as it currently stands is to strongly support delivery in the public realm rather than ask for it specifically to be in the public realm. And it focuses not on the doorstep one, which is the under 5, which definitely would need to be as close as possible to the development. I think it's like 100 meters from doorstep. So in that sense, we understand it's really about the older children and supporting their need to develop socially and create framework in which they will learn their neighborhood and be able to become more independent. And that cannot happen if everything is on a podium.
So this is part D, which I prefer to be, and this, so you're saying it's the over 5 specific.
It's over 5 specific.
That's absolutely right. And I think we still think that we should have the flexibility through the design approach to work out where play are best located.
Okay. Anything else on D2? No. Okay. Any further comments? Understood. Right. Leave that one with me. D3 I haven't got a question about for some reason. What is D3? Anybody got any comment on D3? I don't think anybody's got any comments on D4. D5, so D4, no, we're not going about that one. Yeah, well, D3. I didn't ask, did I not ask a question about D3? I haven't got it on my agenda for some reason.
I believe you covered it in matter one together with the overall spatial
We
strategy.
did generally, didn't we?
Yeah.
I mean, again, this is a bit back talking about the BFN 2 and design and master plan, but we did cover with this, but whether we covered all parts. So has anybody got any comments they wish to make on policy D3? No. Okay, thank you. So D4 we've dealt with. D5 shop fronts and advertising. I don't have any questions about. D6 neighbourliness. This in essence is agent of change principle, which is dealt with in NPPF and London Plan, and you say it's consistent with that.
Yes.
Yeah. Said William, do you want to elaborate on your concern? I think your point is it's duplicating again, the main point, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Very pretty minor comment, but we've seen it in other local plans where they've essentially just signposted to the London plan rather than duplicating the policy, which could be a more effective approach. And again, I think somewhere in this policy there's a requirement for another document to go within your application, a plant maintenance plan, which talks to a point I've made several times.
Yeah. There's also these detailed specific things in table 2, isn't there? Which are a moment in time list, really, are they not?
They do tend to evolve, and that's why they sit in the implementation text alongside a bit of text beforehand to say that the latest available information in the latest published matching guidance document should be used. The idea being to create a framework whereby it's clear at the application stage from the developer what the expectation is. Standard.
Yeah, we're back to where we dealt with it in week 1, wasn't it, about the role of the plan versus the validation checklist and all that.
Yes.
Yeah, but yeah. Thank you. Right. Anything else on that one? No. Which then brings us on to the various heritage policies, which I approach with a bit of a trepidation as usual, because we've got, what have we got? We've got legislation, we've got national detailed policy relating to heritage assets, no doubt got London plan policies relating to different types of heritage assets, and we've got these policies. That said, they some of them are specific to parts of Newham and particular things. I think Historic England are content with the plan and the approach here. I don't think anyone's picked up any significant soundness issues that, in their reps or in the statements. So on that basis, I'm not going to delve into it in any detail. So unless anybody's got anything to say on D7 to D9, or the council wish to say anything, there are mods proposed to D7, aren't there?
Some clarification one on the conservation area and area landscape value.
Okay, any other comments from anyone on those policies? No, in which case we've dealt with everything on the agenda for this morning. So unless anybody's got anything else they wish to say, I will see you again, some of you again, no doubt, later this week and possibly in at the reserve week on the affordable housing. I mean, in terms of the affordable housing, just to be clear, in terms of public, purpose-built student accommodation, obviously we did talk about the affordable housing requirements in that, but they may be subject to whatever the council proposes in response to AP2. So it's not necessarily just policy H3, but because other policies cross-refer to that anyway, don't they? So I'm just saying, keep an eye on that.
Yeah, it's what they're interested.
Okay, anything else from the council? No. So we're back at 2:00 for the climate change policies, and then later the gypsy travel accommodation. Okay, thank you very much.